Hi guys, and welcome to Learn Extra Lives Maths Literacy, and Haley is taking us today.
Hi guys.
Guys, in last week's lesson we looked at rates and proportion. For the next 3 weeks we'll be looking at graphs, and today we'll start with the question, what does this graph tell me? What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. You guys can think about that question, and as soon as we get back we're going to get straight to it. So don't leave, and we'll see you now after the break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I hope you're all ready for an amazing lesson. My name is Indiana and I'm waiting to chat to you. We're on facebook.com/learnextra. Our Twitter handle is @learnextra. So guys, if there is anything that you're struggling with or not understanding, please post questions onto our Facebook page or onto Twitter and we'll help you out. Okay guys, Haley and I, for the last few weeks, we've had a little bit of a tradition where we've been looking at our Facebook numbers. So Haley, should we take it away?
Let's take it away.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone, and we're going to deal with graphs in a couple of moments, but let's look at our Facebook numbers. So Indy, what numbers have we got?
Okay, Haley, 2 weeks ago, we started off.
2 weeks ago.
Okay. We had 6,189 mind setters on the page.
Perfect. And then last week?
Okay, last week we had 6,578.
And that's great increase last week. And today?
Okay, this is super exciting. We have 6,963 mind setters.
I'm so happy that number is going up.
We're nearly at 7,000.
Nearly on 7,000. And look at that, it's going up at roughly, I'm going to estimate now because we've learned how to estimate. I'm going to go with it's gone up with roughly 300, and then we're going up by about 400. So if we increase this every week, now next week let's go for an extra 500. So guys, the only way we're going to increase this is for you to tell your friends and join us. And come on guys, we can help a lot more people. Yeah. They're nearly 7,000, but we're close.
Let's help Haley's number explode next week. So when we do the number, we'll be like, geez, I can't imagine.
Absolutely, that would be wonderful. And what we can do is one of these days we will actually work out our percentage increase, because we did that quite a few weeks ago, and I hope you still remember what we did, but we will take that opportunity to just look at our percentage increase. But if you want to, maybe that can be a little bit of our challenge question for today. Anybody can actually work out the percentage increase and then post it on our Facebook page.
Yeah, definitely. Guys, I'll put those numbers up on our Facebook page. Let's see how much you learned about percentages. And then I've got one more thing. Since we're talking about graphs, this is something that we're playing around with, okay? Let's see how well it works. If there are any graphs that you've been wondering about and you happen to have a cell phone that takes pictures and you want to take a picture of a graph and you want it explained and have questions about it, please do that. Take the picture, send it through, put it onto our Facebook page, and we can put it up on our screen and we can chat about the graph that you've sent in. Guys, if you can, that would be great. If not, it's okay. But I think what we're going to do now is we're going to get straight to Haley and let her continue with her lesson.
Okay, thanks Cindy. Okay, so today we're doing, what does that graph tell me? So, and it's a really, really important skill for us to learn what the graph actually says. Now, I know grade 10 that most of you think, nah, no graphs, or I don't know graphs, or whatever it is that you're thinking. What I want you to do is I want you to kind of take a step backwards and think, okay, I'm doing this for the first time, and let's see what every graph tells me, and each graph is kind of unique. So before we carry on with some graphs that I've got set up for you, to see the story about each one of them, I just want to quickly go over what kind of graphs we've got. Well, we can have a line graph. Okay, my writing's not so good today. A line graph is just purely, you've got your y-axis and your x-axis, and somewhere in between you've got a line, and it tells you something that happened along that line. So it all depends on what your axes actually are, which will determine what the graph looks like and what the interpretation is. I just want you to know that that is a line graph. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is a bar graph. What does that look like? Now remember, these are totally fictitious graphs, because in actual fact they don't mean anything unless I have values on my axes that I can actually compare one value to another. But I want to just show you what they are. So the bar graph, let's find a little bit more space, is again you're going to have your axes. Let's actually change the color of our pen, and on our bar graph we would have columns. Okay, I need to do that in one line. So we will have columns, a space, then the next column, a space, and then the third column. Okay, that is a bar graph, and it's very important, two facts. One, that we have a space between our y-axis, which is our, whoops, we moved it, which is our horizontal axis. Okay, move it back. And that we have spaces between the bars. And I always like to say to my kids that I teach, I say to them, well, think about it like this. Think about if we're sitting in prison and you're behind bars, you can see out. So that's how I kind of think about a bar graph, always has to have spaces. Then we've got a next one, let's find a little bit more space. The next one that we're going to deal with is a histogram. A histogram is very similar to a bar graph, but we're dealing with information. Let's also change the color here. We're dealing with information that is continuous. So we have what we end up having like a skyline of graphs. Okay, that should have been the same length. Let's try that again. Let's move that and delete it. Whoops, lost the line there. It's a skyline, and it's continuous information. So that's a histogram. And the last one that we're going to be looking at is a pie chart. And that is where you take a circle, and I'm just going to draw this freehand, and it might not look great, but it's not too bad. Okay, and within this pie, the pie being my whole and what I'm looking at, and then within that pie we look at fractions in the whole. So we split up our pie into pieces, almost like splitting a chocolate cake. I always refer to chocolate cake. Indeed, I think it's making me a little bit hungry.
I think we're going to have to, next week, definitely use a chocolate cake to explore this pie chart theory a bit more.
A little bit, I think about the chocolate cake because I think about the cake as the whole part of the cake. And then how much of the cake am I actually eating? And I can get through quite a big chunk of the chocolate cake. Okay, now that we've just discussed briefly what the graphs are, let's go and look at some examples. And I'm going to take you through step by step in how you actually look at the graph. So we're going to do a few on the board, and then thereafter I've actually got today's newspaper, so we're going to look through the newspaper and some other graphs that I found. So let's see what our first graph tells us. If I can move. Right, this is a graph that came out of the 2012 budget. You know, the budget speeches that were just a couple of kind of days ago. And this was a graph that we managed to find. Okay, so every graph has a heading, and the heading is your first clue as to what the graph actually says. So what does this graph tell us? First of all, we're dealing with the 2012 budget, but it tells us how much is going to be spent. So how much is going to be spent? Well, the budget is talking about money. So we're dealing with how much money is going to be spent by who? Excuse me. Going to be spent by the government. So let's look at our values. First of all, we're going to deal with our y-axis. Now, I know in maths they talk about the x and the y-axis, and I'm going to use them as well, but it's not important that you know which is your x and which is your y. It really isn't. So on our y-axis, we have 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000, and 250,000. Those are important values. What I want to point out to you before we carry on interpreting this graph is that my scale is actually my scale is the same for each block that I have. So each block represents 50,000, and in actual fact that would represent 0. I think we're missing that number. So each block represents 50,000, and if you ever have to set up your own graph, you need to make sure that your scale is constant. So every block has to represent the same. Now we don't need the same on both axes. We just need the same on one axis, so every block. Okay. Then we've got these stunning little pictures underneath the graph. So we've got a tank. Now clearly this tank refers to defense. And you can see that the defense spends, they still put the number in for us, 41.6 billion. Okay? And it takes me to under 50,000. So what actually is that 50,000? That 50,000 is not 50,000 rand. Okay? So how many zeros are in a billion? Let's go through and just discuss this for a second. So we had 41.6. Right. We had 41.6 billion. Now, I hope you remember, I think it was our first lesson where we discussed numbers, Indy. Was it our first lesson?
No, I think it was.
So billion, we said, was one with 9 zeros. Millions got 6 and a billion's got 9. So the reason we write it like this, it's easier for us to read. But let's change it. So we're going to move our decimal basically 9 times. So it's going to be 41 billion and 600 million. And we need another couple of zeros, we need another 3. So that is the number. Now, if we had to put that number into this graph, first of all, it makes it very big. It makes it kind of not fit in. The other thing is that a lot of people don't really understand what that number actually represents. But if I say 41.6 billion, most people actually understand it. So that is the reason we did that. But now we've got 50,000. So how does that fit into that 50,000 represents what? Because I think we're missing a little part of our graph. So I'm going to say, well, okay, it is just below the 50,000. So there's my 50,000. And clearly I'm missing these zeros. So let's just change the color. Right, I'm missing those 3 zeros and those 3 zeros. So what am I actually missing? I'm missing a million because I'm missing 6 zeros. So this number now, if we can explain it a little better, is 50,000 and this is in million. This is actually 50,000 million or 50 billion. And this number at the top is 250,000 millions or 250 billion. So it's a huge number, and I don't know about you guys, I don't know about you, Indy, but I can't even comprehend that amount of money.
I would love to be able to try and it
would be
sure
nice.
I can. Lots I could do with that.
Absolutely, it would be nice. But okay, let's carry on looking at our graph. So we have a bar graph, and the reason we have a bar graph is that what was spent on the defense, this 41.6 billion that was spent there. And now we've got economic affairs, and I think that's money over there. 145 billion are not related. They are totally unrelated. And that's why I have a bar. I need a space between them if I've got values that are not continuous, that are unrelated. And a good test to see whether they're related or not is think to yourself, can I put these into a different order? Can I start with economic affairs first and then go on to defense and then maybe go on to health? Or I can do them in any order. Like education's close to my heart. Okay, I'm a teacher and I like education. I think I would have put education first. So that would have been the first bar. And as soon as I can change the order, I know that it needs to be a bar graph and I need to have a space in between. Okay, so let's go back to read what this graph tells us. So we had economics, then we've got health at 121.9 billion, education at 207.3 billion, public order and safety 98 billion, housing and community amenities at 120.1 billion, we've got social protection, I'm trying to read sideways, at 157.9 billion, and other is 166.6 billion. I'm coming back to that other in a moment. What I wanted to just point out before we carry on is from a bar graph, we can quite easily compare the values. And we can see how much is being spent because let's look at education. Right, in our education, it's 207.3 billion, and we can see that it is just above the 200 billion there, the two. So that shows me where the graph needs to go up to. I can also see that most money is being spent on education. I can see that the least amount of money is being spent on defense. And the question is, what is the other? Well, the other, Indy, can you think of what other would be, where the government would spend money?
Does that, let's see.
If I put you on the spot.
What would the government spend other on?
Okay, well, I'm sure that they've got things like salaries that they pay, and there might be social things and parks, and I'm sure there's plenty. We could start thinking about it, we would find other. The reason they've clumped this all into other is they're probably not big enough to show you, and otherwise your graph is just going to be way too big. Hey, so that is our bar graph. What I want to show you now is this was, go back to that, the 2012 budget. I have a similar picture from the 2011 budget, but what this graph looks like is totally different to the graph that I had before. So it's kind of strange for me that in 2 different years they're showing it in 2 different ways, but clearly we can do that. So let's just look at this graph, right? So we're looking at the 2011 budget. How much is going to be spent? I'd always like to see a graph of how much was spent after the year, after the budget. I don't know if there is such a graph out there, but maybe we must look for it. Right, so this comes from the Treasury Department website. How much was spent? And now we've got it as a pie chart. So this pie chart, what is important is that every portion represents a different value, a different thing that they're spending on. Okay? The same as the last one, we've got our defense, public order and safety, economic affairs, housing, health, education, social protection, and other. Okay? What they've done now is they have taken the entire spending for the year, or the entire budget for the year, and they've created a pie chart. That is the whole. And then each portion actually becomes a fraction of the whole. So our defense is 38.4 billion rand that is being spent on defense, but in actual fact, if you look at the graph, it's this tiny little portion of the whole that they spend. And what's nice to know is education is still the biggest. Okay? Yay! And very often with the graph, they go in order of how, from small to biggest.
Okay.
Small to biggest. But in actual fact, they haven't done this totally here. So they often do, and sometimes they don't. But I was thinking it was in order, because 38, then we went to 90, but then we went to 130. Okay, now I'm having a fight with this. Right. Let me put it back. And then it goes 121 and 112, and then we go back up. So we should have probably split these around. But it doesn't matter. All our information is there. And it's telling us how much was spent on each department. And it really is quite a pretty thing. That often we get colors in these bars, in these pie charts, because it's easier for us to see what's happening. And I love their little pictures that they've added, don't you? That little so defense cute. Of our... Indy, I think maybe it's time to take a break and we'll look at some more graphs.
Okay, guys, like I've said before, if you can take a picture of a graph that you may have, go and have a look through your newspaper, go and have a look through the magazines that are lying on your mom's desk. And if there is something and you want to take a picture of it with your cell phone and paste it onto the Facebook page or share it on Twitter @LearnExtra, please do that. I will post up the little challenge question about our Facebook percentages, but I know Chris Bafana says he wants a challenge, and I know Stephanie also wants a challenge, so maybe I'll have a little chat to Haley during the break. Guys, don't leave your seats. Tell your friends that Learn Extra Live is on, and we'll be back with you in a second. See you now. Hi guys, and welcome back. I hope you're all enjoying the lesson as much as I am. I think what we're going to do is we're going to get straight back to Hayley. Guys, don't forget to send in those pictures of your graphs if you do have. Hayley, take it away.
Okay, Indy, I hope that we are getting some responses. It would be nice to look at some other graphs, but in the meantime, let's carry on. So in 2011, they were looking at this pie chart, whereas in 2012, that's this year, they did it as a bar graph. Now what I want to do, and what we've managed to do, is I've managed to look at both years together. So now we're looking at comparing the 2011 and 2012 budget. So not quite the pretty pictures that we had in the last graph, but the information's there. So what's important is we're looking at comparing 2011 and 2012 budgets. What's important about this graph is a multiple bar graph, which means I'm looking at two values next to each other, and then I've got a space, and then I'm looking at the next two values. Okay, so again, I've got my budget in billion rands. Okay, so can you see that we've changed the value that we had here, whereas in our first bar graph that I showed you, it actually had 50,000, so we were dealing with millions. Now we're dealing with rands in billions. So this is 50 billion. Okay, I'm looking at two values. I'm looking at 2011 and 2012. So what I'm doing in this graph is I'm actually doing two things. I'm comparing the difference, like I did in the last graph and the pie chart, the difference between defense and education. But within defense, I'm also looking at the difference between 2011 and 2012. So it's important for you to remember that the colors and your key, you will always have a key. This is kind of our key. You will have a key when you've got a lot of information. So there's our key, and we can see 2011's first and then 2012. So we can see that defense budget went up slightly. Our education budget, let's delete that. Our education budget went up by quite a big sum if we look at this. And remember, we're dealing with billions. So this gap went from under 200,000 to just over 200,000, and we're dealing with kind of like, if we had to imagine that that would be about 10 billion rand increase. Health went up a little bit. Public order and safety also went up a little bit. And this is quite interesting. Housing and community amenities actually went down slightly. And we can really only get that information when we compare one to the other. So the two graphs that we were looking at before didn't tell us what happened from one year to the next. So that went down a little bit. Economic affairs went up, social protector went up, and other went up. And I pretty much would like to say that education had the hugest increase. And that really, really makes me happy. So I think we need a lot of money to be spent on education. Right, having gone through this graph, I actually want to stop and say, well, okay, what graphs do I see every day? So I'm going to go over to Indy's desk, and I'm going to look at the newspaper. So, okay, let's do that.
Here she comes.
I'll try to get to behind the table. Okay, here I am. So we're going to look at some graphs that are in today's paper, and I've basically taken out the business report. So, Tebogo, are we ready to actually look at this graph? Okay, I'm not really sure if Tebogo is ready. So I'm going to try and hold this graph up, and let's see if we can get some idea. Indy, do you think that we're ready with this graph?
I think so. I think as long as give Tebogo a bit of time to focus in.
Is Tebogo focused on our graph? Okay.
Yeah, so we've got a thumbs up.
We've got a thumbs up from Tebogo, right. So we're looking at today's paper. That's 1st of March. I can't believe it's already the 1st of March. I started off by looking at the beginning, front of the business report. And in actual fact, there's a graph over here, but I want to look at this graph here. So first of all, in this graph tells me that we've got two pieces of information. I've got a line graph, because it is a line, and I've got two pieces of information because I've got two different colors. So I'm looking at the orange, and my key that isn't quite as clear as the last graph that I showed you, but I'm looking at companies are in orange because it's actually labeled, and households are in black. And we're looking at the percentage change, credit to household and companies, and we're looking at the percentage change from 2003 to 2012. So we're actually looking at how much change occurred in the credit from one year to the next. And we're looking at a percentage change. On our y-axis, we go from kind of a minus 10 to 40, from minus 10 to 40, which shows me that it does go negative because our percentage change can go down. If our amount of credit goes down, and then we're going to have a decrease. And then along our x-axis, we've got the years from 2003 to 2012. And every year shows me what happens in between. So I'm going to just look at the company one for a second, and you can see that it goes down in 2004, and then it goes up to about 25%. That 25% means that there was a 25% change in the amount of credit that corporates used in 2000 from the year before to that year. It's a huge change. And then it kind of goes down a little bit and goes up even further, and it goes down, and we've got a steady going down for a couple of years. And now from 2010 to 2012, we've got this like steady increase. Our households had a huge peak, also at about the same time in 2004 and 2006, it looks like, where we had a huge peak, and then it got steadily lower, and then we had a little peak, and then it got steadily lower again. So what I need you to be able to do is actually be able to read a graph and understand it. Even if you know nothing about credit and you know nothing about what is dealing with it, you should be able to interpret the graph.
That's a good question, actually, Hayley, because on the page, if you have a look here, we do have Stephanie, I think she said, where was it? It's down here. She says she always struggles with graphs. Why are they so important? She thinks it's a stupid question, and she's even blushing a bit. but she says that, and 2 lines down, Tembele said the same thing. Why are graphs so important?
What is important about a graph is a graph tells us a lot of information in a very small, concise space. In actual fact, you know the saying, like a picture says 1,000 words?
Totally. Yeah.
That's exactly what the importance of a graph is. You can read a fortune about a graph just with one little picture.
So true.
So
Yeah.
do you think that'll help?
No,
Who was that? Tebogo?
Yeah,
No, it wasn't.
Tebogo and Stephanie.
Tebogo and Stephanie. I hope
Tembele
it does help.
and Stephanie.
Tembele.
Sorry, Tembele. Hey,
Sorry.
Tebogo is standing right over there. Sorry, Tebogo.
Tembele, sorry. But I hope that does explain. And if you just read the heading, what is the graph actually telling you? Because that heading will give you an example, understanding
Exactly.
of what the graph's about. Then read your axes and see what are they looking at in the graph, and then you can actually start interpreting the graph
Yeah.
and what happens within the graph.
And also, graphs don't necessarily have to be financial or.
No, they
I mean,
don't.
I could do a graph on the color of shoes I have.
Absolutely.
You know, 20% black pumps, that's what I do.
100%.
30% high heels, which I never wear.
Uh,
10% boots for winter.
It would be interesting to see how many of those we actually wear, because I think
Exactly.
I've got my favorite 3 pairs, and then that's
Exactly,
the rest.
70%.
Full cover though. Okay, let's have a look. I'm going to just page through the business report just to show you how many graphs there are. We don't have to actually interpret any more of them, but just how many there are. So, okay, so I hope that we can actually get this. Tebogo, are we on? Okay. So,
Tebogo's our main man.
Tebogo's on. Right, I've got a graph discussing this story, and this is share prices. And in actual fact, I've got quite a few share prices.
You know, give us insights into what shares to buy.
I'm not sure how to interpret that.
I
can read the graph, but to interpret what happens in the future, no, that's not
no
my
fortune
not
teller.
mine. Okay, so share prices over there. Then we're dealing with, this is a nice graph. Let's just look at this one for a second. This is our rand dollar, our rand versus dollar. So I hope we can see this, Tebogo. We're looking at the price from December 1st to February 29th. So basically, just for 3 months, what has happened to the dollar over the time? And we can see it went from about 8 rand to the dollar. It went up slightly in December to about 8.40, and then we steadily got in this kind of going lower, but we got up and down, and then in February now we're just below the 7.60. So that's actually nice to know. Now, what is important is whether the dollar is higher. What does that actually mean to us?
I was just about to ask you. And you're going to tell us, right?
I'm going to try and tell you. Well, if we're buying things in dollar, and I mean, I know like gold is quoted in dollars and things like that. So the higher that dollar value is, or that rand value is kind of like the more rand it costs you to buy $1. So now if you happen to be going overseas, you want that rand dollar to be as low as possible because you want to use the least amount of rands to buy dollars.
I've got a good example. Okay, sometimes what I do is I buy jewelry off the internet, but on eBay, such sites, and they work in dollars. So one necklace, I'll buy like 10 necklaces. Let's say they're $6 today, but then the exchange rate is 7, which is not too bad. Tomorrow, those exact same necklaces, they're still $6, but now the exchange rate has gone up to 9. So now it's going to cost me more.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example. It's a perfect example of how it works.
It's terrible. I always get so upset when I see the dollar's gone up and I'm like, I should have bought it yesterday.
But that's the thing, we can't predict. And if we could predict, it would be wonderful. Okay, so just going to carry on paging. I've got a few more graphs. Okay, these I think are all dealing with share prices, telecom share prices. So pretty much we've got line graphs. I don't think there was anything other than line graphs in this paper. So should we go back to our board?
Let's go back to our board. And
in fact, Tobacco, don't go yet. I've got one more graph to actually show you. Don't leave. I do have another graph. I found this lying around in my classroom, okay, because whenever I find things that are interesting, I think, okay, I must keep that to teach.
So I thought, a pile.
Okay, I do. So I thought, let me just take a few things. I actually was looking, I had a newspaper of the election results, and there were beautiful pie charts about that. But I think the newspaper actually was thrown away, and it's such a pity because it goes back to our first elections. I think those were. Anyway, I must still search for it, and if maybe I ever do find it, maybe I'll bring it back to show you guys. But this is a budget and tariff guide that I found from the city of Joburg, and what's nice for me to see is as you open it up, they show you this pie chart, and pie charts I think also make people feel comfortable because it's kind of like giving me an idea of what's happening. So I'm hoping that people can actually read the pie chart, but it's basically showing me where does the city get its money from. And that was quite an interesting exercise for me to read as to where the city gets its money from. So we can see that the biggest portion, which is 30%, comes from service charges and electricity. And then thereafter it goes smaller and smaller. But each portion is a fraction, so we can see from this where they get the money from. And then it doesn't show us how they're going to spend it, but it does show us where it comes from.
Probably about 10% comes from my traffic fines. Is there a little sliver for traffic fines?
Indiana? No, I can't see you on Indiana. Okay. Right. Property and rates. We've got service charges. We've got fines and agency services.
Oh, you
there
see
you
fines.
Go. How big is 4%?
Really? They're lying.
Operating grants.
Okay. Sections for me.
Let's put this down, and thanks to Rocco for showing us the graphs. Okay, let's go back to my table. Indy, can we chat while I'm doing this?
No, you carry on. Guys, now I think Tawaka's following you.
Tawaka's following me, I guess.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay, I'm here. I'm back.
She's back.
Hi, guys. I don't know where.
Guys, I'm just quickly chatting to you just to say, if you do have pictures of awesome graphs, just take a photo, send it to us on Facebook or on Twitter. I mean, what you could even do, if you really wanted, you could also email it to us. That is helpdesk@learnextra, and that's xtra.co.za. That's helpdesk@learnextra.co.za. So if you don't want to post onto our Facebook or onto our Twitter, email it to us. I'll post onto the Facebook page now, so you've got it. And let's get straight back to Haley.
Are there any graphs that anybody sent us? Would be interesting to know.
Nothing yet.
Come on, guys, show us that you love us. Yes. Send us graphs. Okay, let's discuss this graph for a second. Okay, so what does this graph tell me? We're looking at VAT and customs duties on imports. Okay, that is the amount of VAT and duty that's been charged on imports, and the years are 2009 to 2010. And what this basically shows us is where the goods are coming from. So I quite enjoyed this graph because I liked to see where things are coming from. So let's see if we can get this all into the table. Oh, I don't have my heading. Okay, there you go. So I've got my pie chart. Now what's really important about a pie chart, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but a pie chart makes up a whole. So what we're dealing with the whole here is the whole amount of all imports that come into South Africa. All goods that come into South Africa as a whole. So your whole is always, I'm going to find a little bit of space and we'll come back to this graph. So your whole is always, I don't know if I've got a pen, 100%. So for us to calculate all the portions of the whole, we basically take our fraction of our whole, and we're going to times it by 100 because I want it as a percentage. And then say, for example, I've got 25%, and then I could actually put that into my graph as a portion of the whole. So what's important to remember is that it's 100%. And what I often see in exams and tests, and in worksheets and whatever that I've been doing over the years, is that they ask you, like they'll give you a graph. Let's just take these values out. They'll give you a graph, let's try to close that, and kind of have a few fractions and then ask you for what the balance was there. And they'll give you the percentages for all the other and say that this is 20% and 12%, etc., etc. So that you're only missing one portion. And it's important to remember that you need to add up everything and minus it from 100%, and it'll give you the percentage of the little fraction. Okay, so that's just an important sideline to this graph. Now what I want to discuss is this graph. Now, I know quite a lot of stuff comes from China. But what quite shocked me was that it was 20.5% of stuff comes from China. So we can see China is quite a big portion because it's 20%. And then thereafter, I've got a couple of other countries. So I've got Germany at 13.1%. A lot of stuff comes from Germany. Did you know that, Indy?
Had no idea, actually.
I wonder actually if it's got something to do with cars, because I think we've got quite a lot of German cars in the country.
No, but not that many.
Well, maybe we need to
China,
go into
China. I thought China would be more the size of other.
I thought China would also be a little bit bigger.
Slightly bigger.
Right. And then the USA, we got 7.7%, Japan 5.9%, the UK 5.5%, France at 3.4%, India at 3.2%, and Italy at 2.8%. If you add those all up, we're going to be missing just that portion of the percentage of 37.8%. And that is other. Other meaning other countries. Now what's really nice about this graph is they've done it the way I would have liked the graph to see the graph. They've done it in order. So you've got your biggest fraction starting here, and then second biggest, etc., etc., to the smallest being Italy at 2.8%. Let's change the color of that. Italy being 2.8%. So this other actually must represent a whole lot of countries. A whole lot of countries where we get information from, and each country must be less than 2.8% or less than Italy's fraction, because otherwise we would have just carried on showing the countries. So the countries that make up the other must be quite a few at less than 2%. Now, I'm interested to know how many countries are in other, but that's information we don't have. But we know that there's quite a few, because if I had to take that at roughly 40% and divide this by roughly 2%, because I want it less than Italy, I'm dealing with at least 20 countries. But I've probably got even more than 20 countries, because my twos are going to start getting smaller and smaller and smaller till we actually have like a fraction of a percentage for a country. So it's important information that we can see from a graph. And look at that. We've spoken about this graph for quite a while, and it was the story that it's telling me.
Customs duties on imports.
VAT and customs, absolutely.
No,
and what
it's
the graph's
amazing.
telling me, a whole story. So you see, this is our picture that says 1,000 words. That is definitely what it is.
That's incredible.
Let's see what our next graph is, but I'm not sure if we've got enough time to speak about it now.
Let's take a quick break. Guys, we're going to take a quick break. You can go and get yourself a cup of tea, glass of water, and we'll be entering our last 10 minutes of the show. I can't believe how time flies. So if any of you do have any graphs, now is the time to get it in, or any questions about what Hayley's been talking about. We'll be going over the questions in the last 10 minutes of the show. Okay guys, we'll take a quick break and we'll see you now. Hi guys, and welcome back. Mindsetters, grade 10s. I hope you've really enjoyed the lesson. as usual, it always seems too short. I always feel that. And we've got about 10 minutes left to get those questions in so Hayley and I can start discussing it in the last 10 minutes of the show. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to go straight back to Hayley. She's going to show us 1 or 2 graphs and then questions. So get them in, guys. Facebook.com/learnextra. On Twitter, @learnextra. Hayley, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Indy. I hope you had a good break. I was actually just thinking, we were chatting to Indy during the break, that we've been doing a lot of finance. So we'll come back to finance because I've got a few more graphs that I want to show you, but I thought let's just have a little bit of fun. Now, I found this on Facebook. So I hope that you guys on Facebook can actually appreciate this. It's a graph that compares the United States and the rest of the world. And we're looking at conversions. This is, well, an arbitrary roller coaster. And if you look at the values, we're going to have to read the values off the graph because there's nothing on our y-axis to read. So we're looking at the first bar. It's converting inches to a foot. There are 12 inches in a foot. The next bar is converting feet to a yard. There are 3 feet to a yard. Then we're converting yards to a mile. Well, it's 1,760 yards to a mile. In actual fact, it even went off our screen. Okay, it was so big. And 16 ounces to a pound. Those are all of our conversions. Now, if you compare the rest of the world, where it kind of has a logic smooth sailing, we've got 1,000 millimeters to a meter, 1,000 meters to a kilometer, 1,000 grams to a kilogram, 1,000 kilograms to a ton. Kind of makes sense to me. And I'm not sure why the United States hasn't moved to the metric system a long time ago. Even their temperature doesn't make sense. 32 degrees Fahrenheit is freezing. That's the freezing point. 212 degrees Fahrenheit is boiling point. These numbers are so arbitrary. Look at ours. 0 degrees Celsius is freezing. 100 degrees Celsius is boiling point. Kind of makes sense.
Makes total sense.
But I just love this graph and I thought I want to share it with you. But now maybe we should go back to the other graphs that I've got. Okay, let's go back a few pages.
Hysterical.
Okay, this graph is quite an interesting graph. And I want to show, and unfortunately we're still dealing with finance. So we've got sources of tax revenue from 2004 to 2010. So let's see if I can fit the whole graph onto the page. I need to move it down a little bit. Right. And we've got a bar for each year. So 2004 to 2005, 2005 to 2006. And the only reason we have 2 years here is if you remember, well, I mean, I don't know if you'll remember, but I'll tell you now, tax goes from the 1st of March to the 28th or 29th of February. So that's why we deal in 2 years. It's called our financial year. And what does this bar actually tell me? Well, the source of tax, 100% of the tax. And then it tells me how it is split up. So we've got personal income tax is brown. Our company income tax is the dark blue. VAT is the light blue. And then grey is our fuel levy, customs and other. What's important is to be able to read off this graph. We've got our percentage on the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to see, well, our personal income tax, and we'll just do 2004, and we'll draw a line across. I should probably have done this with something that's straight. And it's between 20 and 40%. A little bit closer to 40, so I'm going to say probably about, call it 32%. Okay? Then the next one, this company income tax, is now from 32% to just under, 60. To just under 60. So the value is the difference between the two. So we don't say that that's 58%, we rather say it is 58% minus our 32% to get the percentage that is spent on companies. And from this we can see the difference between all the years. We can see, for example, in 2008, 2009, a lot of the source of companies was a lot greater than in 2004, 2005. And we can compare a whole lot of things within the graph. So remember, read it carefully and then go through the questions that they ask, and I'm sure we'll do some of those examples probably next week or the week after, where we actually go through questions relating to the graphs. Okay, let's look at our next graph. Our next graph is a line graph. And this is our net monthly tax revenue collection from also those years, from 2006, 2007 to 2009, 2010. So let's move this down, up a little bit. And what do we see here? Well, we see that we've got a whole lot of line graphs. And here's my key. My dark blue is 2005, 2006. Then I've got a light blue, and then a grey, and a black, and a red. So I can quite easily compare the different things that occur within the years. Okay? So I'm comparing the year from April to March, and even I'm comparing between years. So like at this point over here, we're looking at April 2005, and then April, and the black one was April 2008, 2009. So I'm comparing in the year, and I'm comparing between years. So it's really quite a nice graph. We can see which is the highest. And in actual fact, we can see the highest for most of the graph. If we look at just the red and the black is higher all the way. It comes to about the same over there. And then right over here, the red is higher there. So it's just indication of the net monthly. So we can compare. Right. And we can also look at graphs of a stock market. So we've got a whole lot of graphs, and these are line graphs now. The stock market gives me the amount of money. That's probably the amount of shares. Okay? And we're looking at different years. So we're looking at July 2010, January 2011, July, January. So we're looking at every 6 months. But then we can see what happens in between the stock market. So it's quite important for you to be able to now interpret, and I hope that I've actually helped you to interpret. What do you think, Indy? Do you think that they'll have a better understanding of the story that a graph tells us?
Definitely, definitely. Guys, if you do have any questions, I'm taking that it's quiet on the page purely because no one has questions. So guys, if you do, you can still post them and we'll still answer them tomorrow or the next day. So if you are struggling, please, please, please do that.
No, it would be important for us to hear from you guys, and otherwise I hope that you actually enjoyed today's program all about graphs. Do you think we've got time to look at one more graph? I think we can go through to one more graph.
Definitely.
So let's see what our next graph is. Right, we're looking, prime interest rate. I love this. Seems like our whole thing was on finance today.
Telling you,
our prime interest rate. So we're looking at the South African interest rate, and this is the benchmark interest rate. So we're looking at what happens, and again, we're looking at annual now, from January 02 to January 04. It's actually every 2 years to January 06, January 08, and January now. Now, our interest rate kind of started at about just under 10, and then it went up to almost 14 in 2000 and about 3, and then it went down. Oops, we've lost our heading. It went down, continue kind of straight, and we don't have the straight graph. What's really important to note is that it does go up and down. So we can kind of see a trend, and we need to also be able to discuss the trend. So it increases, then it's stable, it decreases, then it's kind of stable for a long time. So almost 2 years that we got stability, then it increases drastically for about 2 years, but it increases almost at a constant rate, a little bit of stability, and then we got this decline, quite a huge decline in probably about 6 months, and then we've now got this solid constant amount. Okay, and I hope that I've actually helped you guys. And Indy, I think it's time to say goodbye.
I know, it's my worst part of the day. Grade 10s. Grade 10s, can you believe that we've already come to the end of our session? I just want to say well done. Well, thank you to Stephanie. I just want to say that you're amazing, and I love the fact that you're always on the page and she's put answers and she helps people. You guys are amazing. Chris Bafana, you know that you're always here. Grade 10s, thank you so much for an amazing show. Grade 11s, don't forget that you're our next, and we will be answering the challenge question on the page in the next 10 minutes. So guys, until next week, grade 10s, we'll see you then. Bye.